She served him with kindness when everyone else turned their backs without knowing he owned the restaurant. By morning, she was fired without warning. But what her boss didn't know was that the man she helped wasn't just anyone. And when the truth came out, it changed everything. So why did Keanu Reeves stay silent? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The Friday night rush at Amador Bistro had a rhythm of its own. The clink of glasses, the chatter of influencers live streaming their truffle fries, and the constant hum of high heels clicking against the marble floor filled the space like a well-rehearsed symphony. Inside the open kitchen, flames flared as chefs called out orders. Waiters in pressed shirts darted between tables with practiced smiles, their eyes constantly scanning for celebrity regulars or heavy tippers. It was the kind of place where everyone pretended to be too busy for kindness, too important to notice the person beside them. Unless you wore a Rolex or walked in with a verified checkmark on your phone screen, you were just part of the background. When the glass doors opened again at 7:16 p.m., no one looked up. Keanu Reeves stepped inside, wearing a dark hoodie, jeans that had seen better days, and scuffed boots. He didn't draw attention, that was the point. He paused, just inside the threshold, taking in the buzz of the restaurant, the way the servers moved, the kind of guests being prioritized. He kept his hands tucked into his pockets, shoulders relaxed. No entourage, no reservation. The hostess glanced up from her stand, saw him standing there, then quickly lowered her gaze back to the VIP list in front of her. She didn't smile, didn't greet him. Instead, she smoothed her sleek ponytail and turned her attention to a well-dressed couple stepping in. Behind him, "Table for two?" she asked, flashing them a practiced smile. Keanu stepped aside without a word. At the bar, a trio of waiters were gathered near the drink station. One of them nudged the other when he saw Keanu. "Probably another lost hiker from Runyon," one whispered with a smirk. "Wrong door, man." They laughed softly, barely trying to hide it. No one offered him a menu. No one asked if he needed a table. They just kept moving, orbiting around him like he didn't exist, except for one person. Natalie Cruz was pushing through the crowd with a tray balanced on one hand, her other arm streaked with splashes of iced tea from a drink that had nearly spilled 3 tables ago. Her curls were frizzed at the edges from the heat, her apron wrinkled, and her ankles sore from double shifts all week. She had only been working at Amador Bistro for 3 weeks, and every day felt like a new battle for dignity. She saw him, standing there alone, uncomfortable, overlooked, and she didn't hesitate. She set the tray down at the counter, wiped her hands quickly on her apron, and stepped toward him. "Hi there," she said gently, her voice a little raspy from hours of talking over ambient noise. "Welcome to Amador. Are you waiting for someone?" Keanu looked at her, his blue eyes calm. He shook his head once. "Just me." Natalie nodded and smiled, brushing a stray curl behind her ear. "No problem at all. We've got a couple tables just opened up. Come with me, and I'll get you seated." She didn't wait for permission from the hostess or glance over her shoulder for approval. She just grabbed a menu and led him through the maze of tables with quiet purpose. Most of the prime seating near the windows was already taken, and the booths in the back were reserved for the high-profile regulars, so she found him a small two-top tucked along the side wall. It wasn't glamorous, but it was clean and out of the way. "This okay?" she asked, motioning to the chair. Keanu nodded again. "Perfect." She handed him the menu, then placed a glass of ice water in front of him. "I know it's a little hectic in here tonight. If you give me just a minute to finish up one table, I'll come back and walk you through the specials. Unless you already know what you're in the mood for." He looked down at the menu, then up at her again. "I'll wait." She smiled again, more grateful than he probably realized. Most people weren't that patient. As she moved back through the restaurant to deliver an overdue check, she noticed Carla, the hostess, watching her with narrowed eyes. Another server muttered something under his breath as Natalie passed. She didn't catch the words, but the tone said enough. It wasn't the first time they made her feel like she didn't belong. At Amador, there were unspoken rules. Staff were expected to focus their energy on guests who fit the brand. Well-dressed professionals, influencers, businessmen with gold watches. If a customer didn't look like they tipped big, they were often ignored or served last. Management never said it directly, but everyone understood the message. Natalie hated that part of the job. She had grown up watching her mom wait tables. Her mom taught her that dignity doesn't come from a wallet, and everyone deserves respect the moment they walk through the door. Natalie didn't treat people by their shoes or their shirt labels. She just treated them like people. When she returned to Keanu's table, she crouched slightly beside him, avoiding towering over the seated guest. Okay, so tonight's specials are pan-seared salmon with a citrus glaze or the house short ribs over garlic mashed. But if you're in a burger kind of mood, the bacon cheddar is our best seller. Keanu studied her for a moment. What would you get if you just worked a 10-hour shift and had 30 minutes to eat? Natalie blinked, surprised by the question. She gave a soft laugh. I'd get the bacon burger, no onions, side of truffle fries, and a strong coffee. He smiled faintly. Then I'll have exactly that. She nodded, jotting it down on her notepad. Coming right up. As she turned to walk away, she heard him speak again, his voice low but clear. Thank you, Natalie. She froze mid-step. Her name tag was covered by her apron. Natalie turned slowly, her brow furrowed in confusion. She glanced down at her apron and confirmed what she already knew. Her name tag had slipped beneath the fold of fabric hours ago. There was no way he could have read it. She looked back at him, trying not to let her voice shake. I'm sorry. Have we met before? Keanu just offered a calm smile and lifted his glass of water. Number, just good at remembering names. Natalie stared at him a moment longer. There was something in his eyes, not arrogance, not flirtation, something quieter, like he saw something others didn't. Like he was watching her with a kind of knowing that made her uncomfortable and comforted all at once. She gave a small, uncertain smile, then nodded and walked toward the kitchen. Inside, the temperature was hotter, louder, and far less forgiving. The head chef barked at a line cook. Someone dropped a plate. Oil hissed from the fryer. Natalie weaved through the chaos and placed the order slip at the front of the grill. Need this one extra crispy, she said firmly. And fresh coffee, please. Ryder, the bartender, leaned over the edge of the kitchen pass. You really going out of your way for that guy? Natalie didn't answer. He's probably gonna tip $2 and vanish, he added with a grin. Just saying. Natalie rolled her eyes and poured a fresh cup of coffee, ignoring the snickers from behind her. She had learned long ago that doing the right thing was rarely popular, but that never made it the wrong choice. When she returned to the table with the food, Keanu was still seated calmly, watching the room. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes missed nothing. He accepted the meal with a nod. I made sure the fries were how you wanted, Natalie said, setting the plate down, and I brewed a fresh pot of coffee for this. She placed the cup gently on the table. He took a slow sip, then nodded with quiet approval. Perfect. She stood there awkwardly for a second, unsure whether to say more. Keanu looked up at her again, his voice smooth but quiet. You treat everyone like this? Like what? Like they matter, Natalie shrugged. I just figure, if you're tired or lonely or having a bad day, someone treating you kindly can change everything. He held her gaze for a second too long. Not uncomfortably, but with a depth that made her feel seen in a way she wasn't used to. Then he nodded once more and picked up a fry. Then thank you, he said again, more gently this time. Natalie walked away, a strange flutter in her chest. She couldn't name the feeling, but something told her that man wasn't just passing through. She didn't know it yet, but that one act of kindness, serving a man the others had ignored, was about to change her entire life. The next morning, the sky over Los Angeles was gray, and the streets were slick with an early drizzle that hadn't fully turned to rain. Natalie Cruz showed up 15 minutes early for her shift, just like she always did. She tugged her damp hoodie tighter around her shoulders and slipped in through the side door of Amador Bistro, heading toward the employee lockers to grab her apron and notepad. But before she could clock in, a voice called out from down the hall. Natalie, manager's office, now. She turned and saw Brent standing, with his arms crossed, his posture sharp, his tone sharper. Something in her stomach tightened. Natalie followed him down the hallway. The office door was already open, and the blinds were drawn. The air inside was cold. On the desk sat a plain white envelope and a neatly folded copy of the staff schedule. She didn't see her name on it. Brent sat down behind the desk, not bothering to offer her a chair. "Have a seat if you want," he said flatly. "This won't take long." Natalie didn't sit. Brent laced his fingers together and leaned back. "We've been evaluating staffing across all locations this month, looking at numbers, performance, branding, all of it. Unfortunately, we're making some cuts." Her heart sank. "Wait, you're letting me go?" He nodded, his expression void of any real emotion, effective immediately. "But I've only been here 3 weeks," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I show up early. I cover shifts. I've gotten compliments from customers. You said I was doing fine." "It's not about performance," Brent replied calmly. "It's about fit." Natalie blinked. "Fit?" He shrugged. "The vibe, the look, the image we're cultivating. You're hardworking, no doubt, but we're leaning toward a different style now. More polished." Natalie stared at him. "This is about last night, isn't it?" Brent didn't flinch. "I'm not sure what you mean. I served a man your staff ignored. The guy in the hoodie. Everyone else treated him like dirt, and I did my job. Now I'm getting fired." Brent reached for the envelope on the desk and slid it toward her. "Your final check. You'll find everything in order." She didn't touch it. "This isn't right," she whispered. Brent looked up, finally meeting her eyes. His tone never changed. "It's not personal." That was the part that stung most. Natalie swallowed hard, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay calm. "You're punishing me for treating someone with respect." Brent let out a slow exhale, as if he were already bored of the conversation. "This is a private business. We make strategic decisions based on brand alignment. Your values may be better suited somewhere else." He gestured toward the door. "Good luck, Natalie." She stood frozen for a moment, her hands clenched at her sides. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out. Natalie stepped out of the manager's office, still gripping the envelope she didn't remember picking up. Her name wasn't on it. No note, no explanation. Just a printed check and a silent command to disappear. As she moved through the hallway toward the dining room, the buzz of early prep filled the air. Someone was vacuuming near the bar. Silverware clinked together in neatly rolled napkins. The smell of brewing espresso floated from the kitchen. It all felt too normal, too untouched by what had just happened. When she rounded the corner, Carla was leaning against the hostess stand, sipping from a smoothie cup, flipping through her phone like nothing mattered. She looked up and spotted Natalie. Her lips curled into a slow, smug smile. "Rough morning?" she asked, not bothering to hide the sarcasm. Natalie didn't respond. Behind the bar, Ryder was rearranging wine bottles that didn't need rearranging. He glanced over his shoulder at her, then leaned closer to Carla, whispering something that made them both laugh. Natalie walked straight past them. She didn't give them the satisfaction, but inside, she was cracking. She reached the staff lockers, tore off her apron, and stuffed it into her backpack. Her hands were shaking, but she kept moving. She grabbed her water bottle, shut the locker door, and pushed through the side exit. As soon as the door closed behind her, the cold air hit like a wave. She stood in the alley for a second, motionless. Then she let out a long breath. It felt like it scraped against her ribs. She pulled her phone from her back pocket and stared at the screen. Her brother's contact was at the top. Luca, 17, favorite human. She hovered over the message icon but didn't open it. Not yet. He had a calculus exam this morning. He didn't need this. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. It read, "I'm sorry about what happened. You didn't deserve that." No name, no details, just those words. She stared at it, unsure whether it was a cruel joke or something else. Before she could respond, the screen faded to black. Battery low. She shoved the phone back into her pocket and started walking. She didn't know where she was going. She just needed to move. She passed a row of cafes she couldn't afford, a boutique she once dreamed of shopping at, a billboard with a luxury watch ad that felt like it belonged in another universe. Each step echoed with the same question. Why? Why did doing the right thing cost her everything? Why did being decent get her punished? And why did that man, whoever he was, thank her by name? She didn't have answers yet. All she had was a crumpled paycheck in one hand, and in the other, the last shred of pride she hadn't let them take. Natalie reached her apartment around 10:30. The building was old, the kind where the elevator groaned every time it moved, and the walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors fighting about laundry again. She climbed the stairs slowly, her feet dragging like she was walking through mud. Inside, everything was quiet. She dropped her bag by the door, kicked off her shoes, and stared at the small stack of bills on the kitchen counter. Rent was due in 12 days. The electric bill was already pink, and Luca's college prep course payments were set to hit her account at the end of the month. Her chest tightened. She pulled the envelope from her pocket and sat at the small kitchen table. Her fingers hovered over the flap. Part of her didn't want to open it. She knew it wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't make sense. Nothing about the last 24 hours made sense. She opened it anyway. The amount on the check was less than what she expected. They'd taken out deductions for uniform damage and short-notice dismissal. She stared at the figure and laughed, soft and bitter. The kind of laugh you only let out when crying doesn't feel worth it anymore. Across the room, the fridge made a soft humming sound. The clock ticked above the microwave. Outside, a delivery truck beeped as it backed into a loading bay. But inside her apartment, everything felt frozen. She didn't even notice Luca walk in. He had his backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds dangling around his neck, and a hoodie zipped up halfway. He looked tired but happy. "Hey," he said, setting his bag down. "I thought you had the early shift." Natalie blinked and quickly rubbed her eyes. "Yeah, I came home early." He didn't press. "Kitchen smells like sadness. You eat anything yet?" "No," she said, too fast. "But I will." "You sure?" he asked, giving her a look. "I'm fine," she said. He nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll make us something later." He walked into his room, the door clicking softly shut behind him. Natalie sat still for a long time. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the check, crumpling it just enough to wrinkle the corners. Then she reached for her phone. The battery warning blinked at her again, but she unlocked it anyway. She scrolled to her messages, thumb hovering over the last incoming text, the unknown number, the apology. She stared at it for a long moment, debating whether to respond. Then, almost without thinking, she typed, "Who is this?" She hit send and waited, but nothing came back. The screen dimmed again. She exhaled and stood up, moving slowly toward the bedroom. She didn't know it yet, but someone had been watching closely. Someone who hadn't forgotten what she did. And her story, this story, was only just beginning. Natalie sat cross-legged on the floor of her apartment. A stack of unpaid bills fanned out in front of her like cards she already knew how to lose. The past due rent notice sat at the top. Next to it, a folded letter from the electric company. A yellow envelope from Luca's college prep program. Her name was printed on each one like a quiet accusation. She leaned forward, head resting in her hands. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep. Her body still ached from carrying trays and cleaning floors the day before. But it was the silence that made her feel the most tired. A silence filled with thoughts she couldn't push away anymore. She glanced toward the door of Luca's room. It was slightly open. She could hear his keyboard clicking, probably working on another scholarship application. He didn't know she'd lost the job. She hadn't told him. Not because she wanted to lie, but because she had to. He was already carrying so much pressure on his back. A full course load, college applications, working part-time after school. She wouldn't be the reason he lost sleep, too. She stood up slowly and walked to the kitchen, rummaging through a nearly empty cabinet. There were 3 cans of soup, a box of rice, and some stale crackers. She sighed and grabbed the rice. 10 minutes later, she set down 2 bowls on the table. Luca came out with a textbook in one hand and his phone in the other. "Smells like childhood," he joked, eyeing the plain rice with a grin. "Did we get downgraded from soup?" Natalie smiled weakly. "Just keeping it simple tonight." He sat down, poking at the food with his fork. I got an email from Cal State today. They're reviewing my application early because of the essay. That's great, she said quickly, leaning on that moment of light. Yeah, and Mr. Holtz thinks I might qualify for the local scholarship too. He's going to write me a recommendation. Natalie tried to focus on the words, tried to let the pride in her brother's voice distract her from the math in her head. How much time she had left, how fast she'd have to find another job, how many hours she'd need to work just to keep them afloat. That's amazing, Luca. Seriously, she said, forcing a bigger smile. He looked at her, brow furrowed slightly. You okay? She nodded too fast. Just tired. He didn't push. He never did. After dinner, he disappeared into his room again. Natalie stayed at the table, staring at her empty bowl, wondering how long she could keep this all together. Then, her phone rang. It buzzed once, twice. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. She hesitated. Some part of her wanted to let it go, ignore it, let the world forget her the way the restaurant had. But her finger moved on its own, and she answered, "Hello?" The voice on the other end was calm, deep, and immediately unsettling in its familiarity. Good evening. Is this Natalie Cruz? Natalie's heart skipped. Her eyes flicked toward the clock on the microwave, but time didn't seem to move. Yes, she replied slowly, her voice cautious. Who is this? There was a brief pause on the line. We met last night, the man said, at Amador Bistro. She froze. The burger? I was the guest you chose to serve when no one else would. Natalie gripped the edge of the counter. I remember. My name is Keanu Reeves. Her pulse stuttered. She had seen the name before, obviously. Everyone had. But in her mind, he'd been just another quiet customer. Now the voice on the other end of the phone sounded clear and unmistakable. Natalie didn't know what to say. You don't have to say anything yet, he continued. I know this is unusual. She sat down slowly, her legs suddenly heavy. I don't understand. Why are you calling me? Because I wanted to thank you, again, for your kindness. She rubbed her forehead. I got fired. I know, he said softly. Natalie's eyes welled up instantly. She didn't know why hearing that from him hurt more than it should have. Maybe because it made it all feel real. Maybe because someone had actually noticed. I didn't mean to do anything wrong, she said quietly. I was just doing my job. You were doing the part most people forget, he said. You treated someone invisible like they mattered. Natalie looked around her dim apartment like someone might be filming her, like this had to be some kind of elaborate setup. Is this real? She asked finally, voice cracking. It is, he replied. And I promise I'm not calling to upset you. She stood again, walking in slow circles near the couch. Okay, then why are you calling? Because I'd like to meet, he said. Natalie blinked. What? I want to talk to you in person, Keanu said. Tomorrow, if you're free. She couldn't help but let out a breathy laugh. You're serious. I am. She shook her head, though he couldn't see it. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say yes, he said. But if you're willing, I'll send you the place and time. It's just a conversation, nothing more. Natalie hesitated, staring at the wall like it might offer some answer. Her thoughts spun in every direction, fear, doubt, curiosity, disbelief. But something about his voice, the sincerity in it, made her pause. After a moment, she asked, You're not just an actor, are you? No, he replied, calmly. And then he added, I own the restaurant you were fired from. Natalie's knees buckled slightly. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. I think it's time you knew the full story, he said. Natalie couldn't speak. The room around her seemed to blur, like the walls had taken a step back to give her space to absorb what she'd just heard. Her fingers trembled around the phone. She lowered herself, slowly back onto the couch, her mind struggling to connect all the pieces. You own Amador? She whispered. I'm a majority stakeholder in the parent company, Keanu replied. I've been working behind the scenes for the last 2 years, quietly, visiting locations without notice, watching how they treat customers, watching how they treat people like me. Natalie let out a slow breath. So last night, I walked in to see how staff handled someone they thought didn't matter. I was ignored, again. But you, he paused. You didn't look away. She swallowed the lump in her throat. I didn't know who you were. I know. That's why it meant something. There was a long silence between them. Natalie's heart thudded in her chest. Keanu continued, his tone softer now. I've seen what happens in these places. People like you get overlooked, just like the customers who don't dress a certain way or speak a certain way. But that's not the kind of business I want to run. She pressed her hand to her forehead. I still can't believe this is happening. I didn't mean for it to be overwhelming, he said gently. And I'm sorry you were punished for doing the right thing. Natalie's eyes burned again. Thank you. But I don't understand. What do you want from me? I just want to talk, Keanu said, face to face. He paused for a beat, then added, I think you deserve more than an apology. And I think you might be exactly the kind of person I've been looking for. Natalie stared at the far wall, trying to process what that even meant. She wasn't a manager. She wasn't anything special. She'd been scraping together double shifts and secondhand shoes just to pay the bills and keep her brother in school. Now, the man whose meal she served the night before was offering her a meeting like it was a job interview for something much bigger. I'll meet you, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what I'm walking into, but yes. There was the faintest smile in Keanu's reply. Tomorrow, I'll send the address. It's a quiet place, nothing fancy. She nodded slowly. Okay. Thank you, Natalie. The call ended. Natalie sat frozen, the phone still in her hand, the air around her thick with disbelief. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long time, something stirred beneath the exhaustion and fear. It wasn't relief, it was possibility. Natalie arrived 10 minutes early. She stood outside the cafe, gripping the strap of her worn leather bag, like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The place wasn't flashy, no marble floors or velvet booths. Just a modest little corner cafe tucked between a bookstore and a florist, with mismatched wooden chairs and a chalkboard menu in the window. The smell of roasted beans and fresh pastries seeped through the door every time someone walked in or out. She took one more breath and pushed inside. The warmth of the room hit her immediately. Jazz music played softly overhead, and the quiet murmur of conversation filled the air. It was the kind of place that didn't try too hard to impress anyone. It just welcomed people as they were. She scanned the room and then saw him. Keanu was seated at a table near the window. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit, open collar, no tie. The look was sharp but not intimidating. His posture was relaxed, one hand around a steaming cup of coffee, the other resting lightly on the edge of a folder that sat in front of him. He looked up as she approached, offering a small nod. His expression was calm, unreadable. Natalie, he said. She returned the nod, suddenly aware of how underdressed she felt in her jeans and faded blouse. Hi, thanks for this. Have a seat, he said, motioning to the chair across from him. She sat down slowly, placing her bag on the floor. Beside her, her heart hadn't stopped pounding since she left her apartment. For a moment, there was just the soft sound of coffee being poured behind the counter and the clinking of silverware from a nearby table. Then Keanu spoke. I know last night was a lot. She nodded. Still Island. I want to clear the air a bit, he said, and answer whatever questions you might have. Natalie folded her hands in her lap. Honestly, I don't even know where to start. He offered a small smile. Then, let me. She nodded again. I own a private LLC that holds majority stakes in several restaurant chains across California. Amador Bistro is one of them. I started investing quietly after seeing how people were being treated on both sides of the counter. Natalie's eyebrows lifted slightly. So, you weren't there to eat? I was there to observe, Keanu replied. To see how staff treated guests who didn't look important, who didn't dress the part. I do this often. I blend in. I watch. She let that sit for a moment, unsure how to respond. And what I saw, he continued, was a culture of entitlement, of appearance over integrity. Most of the staff didn't just ignore me, they dismissed me. Without a second thought, his eyes met hers. But you didn't. Natalie shifted in her chair, trying to hold his gaze but feeling a little out of place. "I just did what felt right," she said quietly. "You were standing there, being ignored. I've been in that position. I guess I didn't want you to feel it too." Keanu nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "Most people wouldn't have noticed, or they would have noticed and done nothing. I don't think that makes me special," she replied. "Maybe not," he said, "but it makes you rare." Natalie felt her chest tighten. She didn't know how to respond to that. Keanu leaned back slightly in his chair. "I wasn't planning to say anything last night. Normally I don't. I eat, I take notes, I leave. Then I follow up with corporate, and we clean house quietly. But something about the way you carried yourself, it stayed with me." She looked down, almost embarrassed. "It was just a burger and fries." "No," Keanu said. "It was dignity. You didn't know who I was. You didn't need to. You treated me with respect when everyone else decided I wasn't worth their time. That means more to me than a resume ever could." She looked back at him, her voice a little unsteady. "But it cost me my job." "I know," he said softly. "And that's something I intend to make right." Natalie blinked. "Make right? How?" Keanu reached for the folder on the table and opened it slowly. Inside was a printed document. She couldn't see the details, but the title caught her eye. Her heart started to race again. "I'm not just here to apologize," he said. "I'm here to offer you something." Natalie stared at him. "What kind of something?" He slid the folder slightly toward her, not pushing it, just letting it sit between them. "I want you to come back to Amador, but not as a server." She didn't speak. "I want you to return as the acting general manager." Natalie sat back in her chair, eyes wide. What?" "You've seen what it's like from the ground floor," Keanu said. "You've felt the pressure, the bias, the hustle. You understand what fair treatment really looks like." "That's exactly what I need at that location." She shook her head slightly, the words not fitting in her mind. "I've never managed anyone. I've never run anything." "You've led more than you think," Keanu said, "and you've done it with grace." Natalie glanced down at the folder, still frozen. This is a lot." "I know," he said. He picked up his coffee cup, let the silence stretch for a moment. "You don't have to say yes. In fact, I'd rather you take some time. Sleep on it. Talk to your brother. Think about what it means." He placed the cup down and folded his hands. "But you deserve more than scraps, Natalie. You deserve a seat at the table." Natalie stared at the folder in front of her like it might vanish if she blinked. She could still hear the word echoing in her mind manager. She wasn't sure whether to laugh, cry, or stand up and walk out to see if the real world had tilted sideways. "You don't know me," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You saw me for 5 minutes. That's not enough to bet a whole restaurant on." "I'm not betting on 5 minutes," Keanu said. "I'm betting on character. And you've already shown more of it than most people I've interviewed." She shook her head. "You could pick someone with experience. Someone who's managed inventory, or payroll, or anything. And they'd probably run it just like Brent did," Keanu replied. "Because they've learned how to survive in the system, not change it." Natalie swallowed hard. "But I'm not qualified." Keanu didn't argue. He just watched her for a moment, then leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. "You know what it's like to be unseen. You know what happens when leadership turns a blind eye. That makes you more qualified than you think. And if you're willing to learn the rest, I'll make sure you're trained. You won't be alone in this." Natalie stared at the folder again. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a shift in her entire world. She had spent her whole life just trying to make ends meet, keeping the lights on, keeping Luca on track. She'd never allowed herself to imagine stepping into something bigger. "Why me?" she asked softly. Keanu gave her a long, level look. "Because you're not trying to impress anyone. You just care." That stopped her cold. No one had ever said that to her before, not like it mattered. He reached for his phone and tapped a few buttons. A second later, her own phone buzzed with a new text. It was the address of the corporate training center for the Amador Group. A quiet space outside the city. "You don't have to give me an answer now," Keanu said. "But if you're curious, come see what the opportunity really looks like. Tour the back-end systems, meet the other GMs. I'll have someone walk you through everything. No pressure." Natalie picked up her phone, staring at the address on the screen. "I'm not saying I'm ready," she said, her voice still shaky. "But I guess I can listen. That's all I ask." She stood slowly, tucking the folder under her arm. She still didn't quite believe this was happening. But something in her chest, something small and long buried, was starting to flicker back to life. Hope. "Thank you," she said. Keanu stood too and nodded once. "You earned it." As Natalie walked out of the cafe, the morning light hit her face. She didn't know what she was stepping into, but for the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was being invited to lead. Natalie stood across the street from Amador Bistro, watching the morning light bounce off its sleek glass windows. She had passed by this building so many times as just another employee, just another name on a schedule. Today, she was walking in as something else. She adjusted the lapels of her thrifted blazer, navy blue, a little too big at the shoulders, and glanced down at her worn white sneakers. Not the most traditional uniform for a general manager, but Keanu had said to come as herself, and this was her. A little patched, a little anxious, but standing up straight. She took one last breath and stepped through the front doors. The hostess stand was unmanned, but Carla emerged from the hallway just as the door closed behind Natalie. Her perfectly polished smile froze mid-step when she saw who had entered. Carla's eyes dropped to Natalie's outfit, then to the folder tucked beneath her arm, then back up to her face. "Are you here for a pickup order?" "No," Natalie said calmly. "I'm here to speak with the staff." Carla blinked, unsure how to respond. Natalie didn't wait. She walked past the bar, past the stairs from two line cooks prepping for the lunch rush, and into the back of the dining room, where the prep meeting was just about to begin. A cluster of employees had already gathered, half in uniform, half still clocking in. Ryder stood at the far side of the room, arms crossed, sipping from a tall iced drink. He squinted at her, like she was a mirage he couldn't explain. Natalie cleared her throat. "Morning, everyone." The chatter slowed. "I know this is unexpected, but I've been asked to step in as acting general manager of this location." Silence. Carla let out a laugh, sharp and disbelieving. "Wait, you're the new manager?" Natalie nodded. "That's right." "You were fired 3 days ago," Carla said, her voice rising slightly. "And the person who fired me," Natalie replied, "is no longer with the quote company." Eyes darted around the room. Ryder lowered his drink. "Wait, Brent's gone?" Natalie looked at him and answered clearly, "Yes." After a review of multiple incidents, including security footage, corporate made the decision to remove him permanently. A murmur spread through the staff. Some were clearly stunned. A few faces even showed the smallest glimmer of relief. But others, especially Carla and Ryder, weren't hiding their resentment. Natalie took another step forward, trying to steady her voice against the weight of the moment. "I know a lot of you are probably confused, maybe even skeptical. That's fair. But I'm not here to play favorites. I'm here to fix the culture that's been broken for too long." She paused, then said it plainly. "Things are changing. Fairness, respect, no more favoritism. That's the new standard. For everyone." Somebody near the back clapped once, quickly followed by another. But the silence that followed said enough. Natalie scanned the room. Some employees stood with cautious curiosity. Others looked away, arms folded, skeptical and unmoved. Ryder still hadn't said a word, but the expression on his face said plenty. Tight jaw, narrowed eyes, one brow slightly raised, as if waiting for her to make a mistake. Carla, meanwhile, looked like she wanted to laugh out loud, but was holding back out of pure shock. Natalie continued anyway. "I'm not here to control anyone," she said. "I'm not interested in running this place like Brent did. I don't care about how much someone tips or what designer label they're wearing. Every customer who walks through those doors will be treated with dignity, and every one of you will be treated with the same." She let that sit for a second. No more corner deals for the best shifts. No more shifting tips to favorites. No more pretending that being popular means being better. One of the busboys, a younger guy with wide eyes and nervous hands, nodded faintly. Natalie caught it, and so did Carla, who rolled her eyes dramatically. Ryder finally stepped forward. "So what, we all hold hands and sing now?" Natalie met his gaze. "Number. You just show up, do your job with respect, and get treated fairly in return. I don't think that's asking too much." Ryder gave a half smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Right. And who decides what fair looks like?" Natalie didn't flinch. "The system does. I'm here to make sure it's followed." Carla scoffed. "Brent said the same thing when he started. Then corporate showed up and told him who mattered." "Corporate already showed up," Natalie said. "That's how I'm standing here." The room quieted again. She saw it in a few faces, hesitation giving way to something like hope. The line cook with the sleeves rolled past his elbows nodded once. The dishwasher, always quiet, folded his arms and tilted his head just slightly, watching her in a way that felt less hostile than it had a minute ago. But for every face that softened, there were two more that hardened. Natalie glanced at her watch. "I'll be checking in with each of you over the next few days. I want to understand how this place runs from the floor to the back door. If you've got ideas or frustrations or suggestions, I want to hear them. If you've got complaints, bring them too." She paused, then added, "This place is going to become what it should have been all along. A place where people work without fear, and guests are treated like people, not wallets." Carla turned and walked away. Ryder followed without a word. Natalie stayed where she was, watching the room settle again, feeling the first layer of resistance digging in. Her first shift hadn't even started, but the fight already had. The lunch rush hit harder than expected. Natalie had barely made it through the new scheduling software tutorial in the back office when the hostess buzzed her. Over the walkie, customers were pouring in faster than the floor could turn tables. She stepped out of the office and into organized chaos, servers scrambling, bussers behind, drinks piling up on the bar with no one to run them. The old systems hadn't been fixed yet, but the pressure was real, and it was mounting. She rolled up her sleeves and jumped in. Natalie took drink orders, wiped down tables, helped in the kitchen when the ticket started to back up. She moved without needing anyone's permission, and when one of the newer servers looked overwhelmed with a 7 top, Natalie stepped in to help plate and serve without saying a word. No ego, just motion. But she could feel it, the watching. Carla, back at the host stand, whispering to another server with a smirk. Ryder, slowing down behind the bar, letting drinks sit longer than necessary. Orders came out slower when she walked by. Communication hiccuped when she stepped into the back line. It wasn't blatant sabotage, but it was enough to feel. She pushed through it. By 3:30, the floor had finally calmed. The last table paid. The coffee machines were being cleaned. Natalie stepped into the break room, leaned against the wall, and closed her eyes. Her whole body hurt. Not just from physical exhaustion, but from the weight of all the unspoken things, the doubt in every look, the unspoken jokes she wasn't invited to hear, the sudden silence when she walked in. The way Ryder avoided eye contact after she stepped in to fix the bar station, the smirks from Carla whenever Natalie offered a reminder, a direction, even just a correction. She sat down for the first time that day, and it hit her all at once. They weren't just challenging her authority. They were waiting for her to give up. She stared at the floor, her legs aching from hours of being on her feet. She thought of Luca, thought of their rent bill sitting on the counter, thought of her mom, working double shifts until her hands blistered, never once asking for fairness, just for the strength to keep going. And then she stood. She stepped back out into the main room and grabbed a rag to clean the espresso station herself. Ryder walked past without saying anything. Carla was already gone for the day, leaving behind a clipped comment on the log sheet about mixed signals from management. Natalie read it, sighed, and filed it away. She didn't erase it. She didn't defend herself. She just made a note. Because tomorrow, she'd be back. And she wasn't going anywhere. By the end of her first week as acting general manager, Natalie was running on adrenaline and coffee. Every morning she showed up before anyone else, checking supplies, reviewing schedules, printing backup menus just in case the online system glitched again. And every night she left after the last table was cleared, walking home with sore feet and 100 thoughts crowding her mind. But it wasn't just the exhaustion that wore on her, it was the shift in energy. Subtle, deliberate, slow, like someone turning down the temperature a single degree each day. It began with Carla. On Tuesday morning, Natalie noticed a reservation that had been deleted from the system without explanation. A party of 6 had called in a complaint that their table wasn't ready when they arrived. Natalie double-checked the log. The reservation had been confirmed 2 days earlier, then gone. She asked Carla about it. Carla shrugged. "System must have glitched. Not my fault." Natalie made a note and moved on. 2 days later, another one disappeared. Then it was Ryder. The drink orders he filled started coming out wrong. Subtly, not enough to get noticed right away. A gin and tonic came out with vodka. A non-alcoholic order was served with rum. At first, Natalie thought it was just stress or distraction, but then she realized he was only making mistakes when she was nearby when she might be blamed. On Friday, a regular left a Yelp review. Natalie saw it first thing Saturday morning. 1 star. Harsh. It read, "This place has really gone downhill. New management is clearly in over her head. Waited 30 minutes for a table despite reservation. Bartender messed up both drinks. Manager avoided the floor." She stared at the screen, reading the words 3 times. Avoided the floor? She'd been covering 3 sections that night while the hostess stalled the guest at the front. She knew what this was. Still, she didn't say anything. Not to Carla, not to Ryder. Instead, she printed the review, folded it in half, and slid it into a folder in her desk drawer. She labeled the folder Incidents, Week 1. That afternoon, she added a second document to the folder. A typed summary of the reservation issues, times, dates, missing entries, staff logged in at the time, all documented. Then another for the drink mistakes. Each one included exactly what happened, how it was addressed, and who was involved. She kept her tone neutral, professional, unemotional. She wasn't going to argue. She was going to log everything. And then on Sunday afternoon, during the lull between the brunch rush and dinner prep, something unexpected happened. Miguel, the quiet busboy who barely spoke above a whisper, walked past her in the kitchen hallway. He didn't look up, didn't pause, but he slipped a folded napkin into her hand. She opened it when he was gone. Inside, in small, careful writing, were just 5 words. "They're setting you up. Be careful." Natalie stood frozen in the hallway, the napkin still crumpled in her hand. Her eyes scanned the edges of the kitchen to make sure no one was watching. Fryers hissed, plates clattered. Carla's voice rang faintly from the front, but Miguel had vanished into the back like he was never there. She read the note again. "They're setting you up. Be careful." Her first instinct was to storm back out to the floor and confront them all. Carla, Ryder, anyone who had even looked at her sideways. That week, she wanted to scream, to defend herself, to ask them why they were doing this. But she didn't move. Instead, she walked calmly to the manager's office, closed the door behind her, and locked it. She sat down at the desk, opened her folder, and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. She wrote the date at the top. Then she documented the napkin. Where, when, who gave it to her, the exact wording, the context. No emotion, just facts. Natalie had grown up watching her mother survive jobs where no one listened until it was too late. Her mother never fought back. She just endured. But Natalie wasn't going to do that. She wasn't going to yell. She was going to build a case. She pulled up the employee schedule on the desktop system and began comparing it to reservation complaints. She noticed a pattern. Carla worked every shift where reservations were deleted. Always the one logged in, no one else. She didn't jump to conclusions. She just printed the logs and added them to the folder. Then she checked the bar reports. 2 of the drink complaints were marked correctly in the POS system, meaning someone had made the right selection but poured the wrong thing. That meant it was intentional or careless, but not a tech error. Ryder. She printed that too. The folder was growing. She leaned back in her chair, listening to the hum of the fridge in the break room behind the office. Somewhere out front, someone dropped silverware. Someone laughed. They didn't know she was documenting every step. They thought she'd crack, but she wouldn't. She pulled out her phone and texted Miguel. She had never asked for his number, but he'd filled in last minute on her first night back, and she'd saved it under Busboy M just in case. She typed, "Thank you. I'm not ignoring it. I'm watching now." He didn't reply, but she didn't need him to. The next morning she came in, even earlier than usual. She reset the entire reservation system password and required a digital PIN for edits, something only she and the assistant manager would have. She assigned logins individually instead of using the outdated shared terminal account. Then she sent a quiet update to Keanu's operations liaison. Just a short report, no accusations, just data. And finally, she added a note to herself. Week 2 begins today. Stay calm. Watch everything. By midweek, the pressure hadn't let up. It had shifted. Natalie noticed the glances. Conversations paused when she walked into a room. Carla's compliments came laced with sugary sarcasm. Ryder started arriving late, saying he was stuck in traffic, then making sure everyone overheard him joke about how management has nothing better to do than take notes. But Natalie never flinched. She just kept recording everything. One evening, after a long shift, she sat at the office desk again, reviewing the daily receipts. She noticed something odd. A cocktail that was comped under a generic customer complaint tag. But the guest hadn't complained. Natalie had spoken with them personally. They left smiling. She cross-checked the receipt time with security footage. Ryder had comped it without her knowing. She printed the evidence and slid it into the folder. The folder now had 12 separate documents, some printed, some handwritten, each one cataloging actions that weren't mistakes. They were intentional, calculated, spread out just enough to avoid suspicion if seen alone. But together they told a story, and Natalie was building it day by day. That Thursday, Miguel approached her while she was reorganizing the stockroom. He didn't say anything. He just handed her a rolled-up sheet of printer paper. Folded inside was another handwritten message. "Brent's still texting Carla. He told her to wear you down. Ryder too. No signature, no dates, but she believed him." Natalie looked at Miguel, who stood stiffly with his hands in his apron pockets. He didn't meet her eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked gently. He shrugged, barely lifting his shoulders. "Because you're the first one who's ever remembered my name." She nodded slowly, folding the paper and tucking it into her folder. "Thank you," she said quietly. The next morning, Natalie submitted a formal request to corporate HR to install a backup camera angle in the stockroom hallway and manager's office hallway, two areas that had been mysteriously omitted from footage in prior reviews. No one questioned her. She stayed ahead of their games without ever raising her voice. She didn't call Carla out. She didn't argue with Ryder. When reviews dropped online, she responded to each one professionally, thanking the guest and offering to resolve the issue directly. Her responses were calm, measured, visible to the public. But behind closed doors, she was documenting. By Friday, she had enough entries to begin linking patterns: who worked which shifts, who processed what orders, who logged into the POS system, during which errors. It was all starting to connect. But Natalie said nothing. Not yet, because she knew now that this wasn't just about her job. It was about proving something deeper. That integrity wasn't weak, that silence wasn't surrender. And that kindness didn't mean she couldn't fight back. Sunday brunch at Amador was a test of endurance. The line wrapped around the block by 10:30 a.m. Guests clutched lattes in one hand and Yelp reviews in the other, debating whether the wait was worth the brioche French toast. Inside, the kitchen roared. Orders piled up, plates flew, voices clashed and overlapped, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Natalie was everywhere. She had arrived before sunrise, prepped backup coffee stations, restocked napkins herself, and printed a modified seating chart to handle the new reservation system she'd implemented only 4 days ago. Every staff member had received a printed sheet with their section assignments, color-coded to avoid overlaps. No more whispered negotiations behind her back. No more favorites taking the prime tables. But none of that could prepare her for what happened when Ryder walked off the bar at 11:45 a.m. He didn't say he was sick, didn't tell anyone where he was going. He just vanished during the peak of service, leaving 15 tickets unfilled and 6 customers waiting on mimosas that had already been charged. Natalie didn't panic. She dropped the seating chart on the expo counter, rolled up her sleeves, and stepped behind the bar. She wasn't a mixologist, but she'd learned the layout fast. She pulled orange juice from the fridge, grabbed the chilled flutes, and started pouring. Carla walked by and muttered, "You're going to break the espresso machine." Natalie didn't respond. She handed off a round of drinks to one of the servers and immediately began the next ticket. Across the restaurant, a man had stepped in and taken a seat near the entrance, where the lighting fell in clean diagonal lines across his charcoal suit. No hoodie, no scuffed boots. Just polished black shoes, cufflinks, and a quiet composure that didn't match the chaos unfolding around him. No one recognized him, but he recognized everything. Keanu sat without saying a word. He watched as the wait list surged. He watched Carla stall guests at the door until Natalie made eye contact and gave the nod to seat them anyway. He watched as Natalie worked the bar for 35 minutes straight, never once raising her voice, never once blaming anyone. She wiped the bar down, pulled ice from the backup bin, poured with steady hands. Even as glasses clinked too loudly or a tray nearly tipped, she didn't flinch. Customers started whispering to each other between bites of their avocado toast. "She's really running the place, huh? I thought the manager was that guy with the beard." "No, she's in charge. Look at her. She's fixing everything herself." Natalie didn't hear them, but Keanu did. And for the first time since stepping in, his expression changed. Not a smile, not a nod, just the faintest easing of the jaw. Like watching something unfold exactly the way he hoped it would. The shift didn't slow until almost 2 p.m. By then, the brunch crowd had thinned into clusters of late diners sipping the last of their lattes. The energy shifted. Less rush, more whispers. And Natalie finally stepped out from behind the bar, wiping her palms on her apron, not realizing her entire shirt was slightly damp from the espresso steam. She looked around. Ryder was still missing. She made a mental note to document it in the incident log the moment she had a break. No retaliation, just facts. Miguel, the quiet busboy, passed her a fresh pitcher of water. He gave her a quick nod, eyes flicking toward the man by the window. Natalie turned. The man had been there for over an hour, calm, sipping a single cup of black coffee. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. Maybe he was a regular from another location, maybe a retired actor. His presence was sharp, but not loud. He lifted the coffee toward her, almost like a salute. She blinked, then moved on. By 2:30, the last plates were cleared. She gathered the team for post-brunch notes. No one clapped. No one congratulated her for handling the meltdown, but they didn't protest either. That was something. Carla lingered by the hostess stand, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. She was waiting for a mistake. Ryder finally returned, looking smug and unapologetic. "You disappeared for an hour and a half," Natalie said quietly, not in front of the others. "Had a family emergency," he mumbled, looking at his phone, not her. "You wouldn't get it." She didn't argue. She just made a note. After the debrief, Natalie checked her phone for the first time since the brunch rush. One new message, unknown number. She opened it. "Proud of how you handled today. K." Her breath caught. Keanu, the man by the window. Of course. She hadn't recognized him in the suit, without the worn hoodie or casual boots, but now it was clear. She looked up, scanning the floor, but he was already gone. No goodbye, no dramatic exit, just a quiet check-in, a quiet approval. She stared at the message for a long moment. Her shoulders loosened, not in relief, in something deeper, like someone had finally seen her for what she was trying to do. Not just keep the lights on, not just survive the politics, but build something better. For the first time in days, Natalie smiled. It wasn't big, it wasn't public, but it was real. And it gave her just enough strength to keep going despite the whispers, the silent resistance, the slow sabotage. Someone saw it. someone who mattered. And even if no one else clapped today, even if no one said thank you, she knew. She wasn't alone in this. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. The kitchen lights flickered off one by one as the last of the Sunday staff left through the back. Natalie stood alone near the edge of the bar, her phone still in her hand. The message from Keanu hadn't disappeared. It sat on the screen like an anchor, simple, solid, grounding. She stared at it again, not because she didn't believe it, but because it felt like the first time someone had acknowledged her efforts without strings. Her entire life had been about proving herself. As a daughter, as a student, as a woman, in a world that told her to smile more and lead less. She had fought her way through silent judgments, through late shifts and fake apologies, through tight paychecks and looser promises. And now, she was here managing a restaurant she once served in, rebuilding a broken team with patience and integrity. But it had been lonely, and this message, short as it was, had cracked something open. Not weakness, not tears, but strength. A different kind of strength. Not loud, not angry, just steady. She finally set the phone down and pulled out the black notebook she'd tucked behind the register. Her incident log. She added the time Ryder disappeared, the 2 tables that received incorrect drinks, a note about Carla turning away a walk-in party at peak hour, despite open tables in the corner. She didn't write it with bitterness. She wrote it because it mattered. Because no one builds a fair system without documentation. The door chimed. Natalie looked up, startled. It was Miguel. He hesitated. "I forgot my jacket," he said softly. She nodded and motioned him through. As he grabbed it from the back, he turned again. "Hey," he said, stepping forward, voice quiet. "That guy today? The one by the window?" Natalie's eyes met his. He was watching. Like, really watching. "I know," she said, her voice steady. It was him. Miguel's eyes widened. "Keanu?" She nodded once. The boy's lips parted like he wanted to ask 100 things, but all he said was, "So he saw." Natalie smiled gently. He did. Miguel glanced at the door, then lowered his voice. "I'm not the only one who sees what they're doing. Carla, Ryder, the way they talk when you're not around. Some of us want things to change, but we're scared." Natalie didn't flinch. "You don't have to fight for me," she said. "But if you want to fight for this place, its future, then speak when it matters. Document everything. Truth doesn't need noise, just courage." Miguel nodded slowly, then quietly walked out the door. Natalie exhaled. She was exhausted, but not broken. Tomorrow would come with more sabotage, more side eyes, maybe even more bad reviews. But today had ended differently. Today, someone believed in her, and that changed everything. Even if no one else knew it yet, she was no longer surviving. She was building something. And she wasn't alone. The hum of the walk-in refrigerator masked most of the clatter from the kitchen, but Natalie still startled slightly when the door behind her creaked open. Miguel slipped inside, closing it gently behind him. His eyes flicked toward the shelves, then back to her. He wasn't holding any produce. No clipboard, no pretense. Natalie raised an eyebrow. "Everything all right?" Miguel's face was tight, too serious for a kid who'd just started shaving. "No," he said simply. Natalie put down the order she was checking. Miguel stepped closer and glanced at the door again, to be sure it was fully shut. "I didn't want to say this out there," he whispered. "They'd know." Natalie leaned slightly forward. "Who?" He looked her square in the eyes. "Carla's been texting Brent." Natalie's breath caught. "Brent?" Miguel nodded. "She's still in touch with him. Says he's trying to find a way back in. That he wasn't really fired, just pushed out. She's helping him prove you can't run this place." Natalie stared at him, stunned, silent for a moment. "He said you're temporary," Miguel added. "That once you crash and burn, he'll be reinstated." The blood in her ears pulsed. Not from fear, from something colder, deeper. "How do you know this?" she asked carefully. "I heard her. In the alley. She was talking loud on the phone," said he. "Told her to slow down the service on weekends. That he had people watching. I thought she was bluffing, but..." He paused and swallowed hard. "Ryder too?" Natalie asked. Miguel hesitated. He's loyal to Brent. Always said Brent was real management. Called you a charity case when you weren't around. Natalie's fists clenched slightly at her sides, but she didn't lash out. Instead, she nodded once, slowly. Thank you, she said, eyes not leaving his. Miguel stopped. I didn't want you to get blindsided. You've been fair to me. Natalie took a long breath. I'm glad you told me, she said. And don't worry, this stays between us. Miguel nodded again, then slipped out of the walk-in just as quietly as he had entered. Natalie remained behind, leaning against a metal shelf. The chill in the storage room had nothing on the chill wrapping around her spine. Brent was behind this, all of it. The reviews, the mistakes, the delays. It wasn't just petty sabotage from entitled staff. It was organized, coordinated, a plan, and she had walked straight into it without realizing she was the target. Natalie closed her eyes for a moment. The air smelled of cilantro and wet cardboard. Familiar, grounding. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She picked up her tablet and she opened the logs. If Brent wanted proof she couldn't run this place, she would give him the opposite. Proof of every single failure engineered by his people. She left the storage room and walked briskly to her office. The night crew was still cleaning. Carla was already gone, as usual. Natalie didn't look at anyone. She sat down at her desk and opened the system database. She began with the reservation logs. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. On weekends when Carla worked the front, large tables were seated slower. Walk-ins were turned away, even when the floor had space. VIP clients were marked as no-shows or late arrivals. Some regulars hadn't returned at all. Natalie pulled up timestamps, notes, staff assignments. Then she matched them against customer complaints, most of which had been posted on Yelp under suspiciously similar accounts, all written in a similar tone, all posted within minutes of each other, all conveniently highlighting managerial failure. She flagged every one. Next came riders' drink logs, missing alcohol, substituted brands, bills charged incorrectly, and the most damaging two incidents where Natalie had personally fixed riders' mistake before a customer could make a fuss. He had shrugged both off as being under pressure, but now, in this new light, they glared back like red flags. She added them to the log. Then she reviewed the inventory audits, late deliveries. Someone was fudging the count sheets. That someone was Carla. Natalie opened the camera feed and went back to a Saturday 2 weeks ago. There she was, Carla at the back door, whispering into her phone while covering her mouth with a clipboard. She took a screenshot and added it to the folder labeled Incidents, Potential Internal Sabotage. Natalie paused. She rubbed her eyes and took a sip of cold coffee that had gone bitter. But she wasn't bitter. She was resolute. If Brent thought she would fold under pressure, he hadn't learned a thing since Keanu let him go. She stood up and scanned the room one last time before locking her office. Tomorrow she'd meet with the silent partners, but tonight she would be her own witness. She went back over the entries once more, logged them, timestamped them, cross-referenced employee schedules, all without emotion. Just truth, just facts, just proof. Then she picked up her phone. There was only one person she trusted to see this first. Natalie tapped out a short message to Keanu. I need you to see something. It's bigger than I thought. She attached the file and hesitated for just a second before hitting send. No accusations, no demands, just evidence, just the truth. Within minutes, a reply came. I believe in you. Let me know when you're ready to act. She stared at that message longer than she expected. It wasn't just approval, it was trust. For the first time since she'd walked into that dining room in sneakers and a blazer, she didn't feel like an imposter. She felt like a leader. Natalie stood by the window of her small apartment, looking out over the streetlights. In the distance, a siren wailed. Somewhere, dishes clattered in a neighbor's sink. Life moved on. But inside her chest, something had changed. She wasn't just protecting her job. She was protecting integrity. Protecting those who believed they didn't matter. protecting her own voice, which had been silent for too long. Tomorrow wouldn't be easy, but tomorrow, Natalie would walk in with her shoulders squared and her eyes sharp, because now she knew she wasn't alone, and she wasn't afraid anymore. It started with a receipt. A couple had just finished brunch, avocado toast, cappuccinos, mimosas, and were smiling until the bill arrived. Natalie noticed the subtle shift in their expressions as they stood up and approached the host stand, receipt in hand. "Excuse me," the woman said gently. "I think we were charged twice for the same item." Natalie took the slip and scanned it. Sure enough, the mimosa line item had been rung in twice, each with different timestamps just minutes apart. Natalie's brows furrowed. She knew the system inside out. Duplicate charges didn't just happen without intent. She apologized, refunded the second charge immediately, and handed them complimentary dessert vouchers for next time. The guests left satisfied, but Natalie's pulse had quickened. Back in the office, she pulled up the transaction log. The override code used on that bill belonged to Ryder. And not just that one. She checked the same table's digital footprint in the POS system. There had been a void, then a re-entered charge, then another override, all within a 10-minute window. This wasn't a glitch. It was deliberate. Natalie's jaw tightened. She started pulling reports. More voids under Ryder's code. More subtle overcharges. Sometimes just a few dollars. Sometimes entire duplicate items. She clicked through nights, one after another, building a pattern. It wasn't just sloppy bartending anymore. It was theft. And worse, it was theft aimed to make her look incompetent. Every mistake a guest complained about had happened under her shift. Every complaint that went to Yelp was under her watch. She printed the logs, highlighted every questionable entry, stapled the receipts. Then she walked to the bar. Ryder was laughing with another server, leaning casually against the espresso machine. She waited until the server walked off, then approached him quietly. "Can we talk in the back?" He raised an eyebrow. "What's up, boss lady? Another glass out of place?" She didn't answer, just turned and led him into the small office. Once inside, she placed the stack of papers on the desk. "I need you to look at these." He flipped the pages with exaggerated slowness. "Looks like a bunch of receipts. They all have your override code." He shrugged. "Must be a system glitch. You know how these machines are." "There's no glitch, Ryder. These are time-stamped, confirmed, and traced to your login." His cocky smirk faltered for a second. Just a second. Then he leaned back in the chair. "Maybe someone's using my code. I mean, it's not like it's hard to guess. Your code was changed 3 days ago, after I asked IT to reset everyone's credentials. Now," he paused, just long enough for her to know he was cornered. "Are you accusing me of something, Natalie? I'm asking you if you're working alone." His mouth opened, closed, then his eyes narrowed. "You think you're so clever, but you have no idea how this place works." She didn't flinch. "I know exactly how it used to work. And I know that's ending." He stood. "You're going to regret this." But Natalie was already gathering the papers. Number. "I think we're just getting started." Ryder stormed out of the office, but Natalie didn't follow. She sat for a moment, hands flat on the desk, letting the quiet settle. Her heart was racing, but her mind was clear. This wasn't just a petty bartender trying to scam tips. It was coordinated, and she was in the middle of it. She placed the printed receipts in a manila envelope and tucked it into her bag. The rest she emailed to herself and backed up to the cloud. She wasn't taking chances. Every transaction, every override, every suspicious comp and charge, she flagged them with dates and notes. By the time she locked up that night, the restaurant was quiet, but the weight on her shoulders was anything but. She walked out into the night air, clutching her bag, like it contained evidence from a crime scene. The next morning came with a thick haze of dread. She arrived early, earlier than anyone else, and started scanning through the weekend numbers. She wanted to make sure nothing had been altered overnight. But before she could get far, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. There's something bigger at play." K. Her breath caught. Keanu. She hadn't heard from him directly since that brunch day. Just the quiet text of encouragement he sent after she'd handled the brunch chaos solo. She replied, "When?" Almost instantly. "Now. I'm outside." Natalie's heart jumped. She stood, peeked out the window, and there he was. Keanu Reeves. No hoodie this time. A simple navy coat, jeans, and that same calm presence. He looked like someone who didn't belong in chaos. And yet he had walked straight into hers, more than once. She opened the door, and he nodded. "Walk with me?" he asked gently. She grabbed her coat and followed him onto the sidewalk. It was still early. The street was quiet. Morning sun stretched long across the pavement. "I think someone's trying to get me fired," she said, skipping pleasantries. "I know," he replied. "That's why I'm here." She turned to him, stunned. "You know?" Keanu exhaled, then looked at her. "The man who used to own the place, Brent, he's been trying to buy it back, but not directly, through proxies." Natalie stopped walking. "Carla," she whispered. He nodded. "And Ryder," she added. "I had a hunch. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure. But it's bigger than just internal sabotage. Brent's been influencing some vendors, slowing down deliveries. He's even had someone try to interfere with the liquor license renewal." Natalie felt sick. "Why?" "Because he thinks I'm not paying attention, that I left it in the hands of someone he can dismantle." She clenched her jaw. "I have receipts, logs. I've documented everything, every override, every charge. I confronted Ryder last night." Keanu nodded again. "Good. Keep all of it. Don't confront anyone else." "Not yet." "What's the plan?" Keanu stopped walking and looked at her, eyes steady. "The plan," he said, "is to let them keep digging until they hit bedrock." Natalie sat quietly in the back seat of the town car, staring out at the towering buildings as they passed. Her hands were clasped tightly on her lap. The driver hadn't said a word since picking her up, only offering a respectful nod and holding the door open like it was something he did every day. Natalie wasn't used to this kind of formality. They pulled up to a sleek, glass-front law firm downtown. The brass plaque outside was minimalist but impressive. The kind of place where billion-dollar problems were solved behind soundproof doors. She was ushered inside by a quiet assistant, led down a carpeted hallway to a corner office that smelled like leather and lemon polish. Keanu was already there, seated in a simple navy suit, looking calm but serious. He stood when she entered, offering a gentle smile. "Thank you for coming, Natalie," he said. She nodded, unsure what to say. The last 48 hours had been a blur: Ryder's sabotage, the suspicious receipts, and now, this. Keanu gestured toward the chair across from him. "Please, sit. What I'm about to share with you isn't public knowledge." Natalie took the seat, her heart pounding. She had expected a conversation about her role at the restaurant, or maybe more questions about Ryder's account manipulations. What she didn't expect was what came next. "Brent wasn't just a poor manager," Keanu began, folding his hands. "He's part of something much larger. A network." Natalie blinked. "A network?" Keanu nodded. "Over the last year, several of our restaurants, ones I quietly back, often under different names, have had strange financial discrepancies. Overbilled customers, altered tip reports, unexplainable inventory losses. At first, I thought it was just bad hires, but the pattern started repeating. Different cities, same playbook." Natalie leaned in slightly. "So, Brent wasn't acting alone?" "No," Keanu said. "And I have reason to believe he's been coordinating with other ex-managers. They share techniques, systems, even hacked point-of-sale tools to manipulate the books while making it look like mistakes or customer issues." Natalie's mind reeled. "But why?" "It's organized fraud," Keanu replied. "Low enough amounts to stay under the radar. But when you multiply it across locations and weeks, it adds up. Hundreds of thousands, maybe more. And every time someone gets too close like you just did, they try to bury them with sabotage." Natalie's chest tightened. "The Yelp reviews, the double charges, the missing receipts." Keanu nodded slowly. "I believe Brent panicked when you returned. He probably thought he'd have time to clean things up, maybe frame you. But you logged everything. That's the missing link we needed." She sat back in her chair, eyes wide. "So what happens now?" Keanu's expression turned solemn. "Now, we take them down." Natalie's pulse quickened. She hadn't expected this. She thought she was fighting for her job, maybe her dignity. But this was bigger, far bigger. It wasn't just about Ryder or Brent. It was a system, a shadow web of corruption, thriving beneath polite dinner service and carefully folded napkins. Keanu stood and walked to a nearby cabinet, unlocking a drawer and pulling out a manila folder. He handed it to her carefully. Inside are reports from 4 other restaurants, he said. 1 in Chicago, 1 in Atlanta, 1 in San Diego, 1 in Portland. Different names, different staff. But the fraud patterns match. Altered sales, voided tickets after closing, large inventory orders that were never delivered. Natalie flipped through the pages. Each one showed identical formatting to the printouts she'd seen at her own restaurant. Only the names were different. She saw the voids, the backdated corrections, and the suspicious login timestamps. Her skin crawled. Keanu sat down again, his voice calm but firm. Brent worked at 3 of them before he landed at ours. Each time he left after a dispute with the owner. Always walked away clean. Never prosecuted. Natalie frowned. Why not? Because the evidence was circumstantial. And because most owners didn't want the publicity. They just wanted the problem to go away. She let out a breath. But now there's a pattern. Now you can connect it. He nodded. That's why you're critical. You're the only one who stayed long enough. Quietly documented everything, and didn't burn the bridge when it got messy. Natalie leaned forward, eyes locked with his. Why me? Why tell me all this? Keanu looked her in the eye. Because I trust you, and because I've been watching how you've handled the restaurant under pressure. You stepped into chaos, and instead of hiding, you cleaned the floors, ran the kitchen, supported the staff. You didn't complain. You just worked. He paused, letting that sink in. You earned their respect, not because of a title, but because of your heart. Natalie's voice was low. You think I can help expose them? I think you already have, Keanu said. You just don't realize it yet. She sat back in her chair, her mind spinning with implications. Names, motives, evidence trails, betrayals, all of it cascading into something she'd never imagined she'd be part of. But what happens to the people still working under them? She asked, her voice tinged with concern. The honest line cooks, the waiters just trying to pay rent. If this comes crashing down, do they get hurt too? Keanu's face softened. That's the part I'm most careful about. We're not going to make this public until we have airtight evidence, enough to remove the rotten wood without tearing down the whole structure. He leaned forward. And that's where you come in. Natalie felt her throat tighten. You want me to stay? Keep working there, like nothing's wrong. Keanu nodded. Only for a little longer. Collect the last pieces. You're the only one who knows where to look now. The system already trusts you. She hesitated. What about Ryder? He's sloppy but dangerous. And Carla, she's still talking to Brent. If they sense I know too much. You'll be protected, Keanu said. I've already transferred ownership of the restaurant into a holding trust, quietly. Brent no longer has any legal claim, and I've placed someone inside, someone watching from the shadows. If anything happens, we'll know. Natalie's brows lifted. You planted someone? A dishwasher. No one notices him, but he's former military, keeps logs, and he's loyal. Natalie almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but she didn't. Not anymore. Everything that seemed impossible now felt plausible. In this world, where kindness masked complexity and corruption wore a smile, it made sense. I'll do it, she said quietly. I'll finish what we started. But when this ends, I want one thing. Keanu waited. I want the staff taken care of, the ones who stuck it out. I want them promoted, supported, given a future. Keanu didn't hesitate. That's why I chose you. The restaurant was humming with its usual rhythm, cutlery clinking, conversations murmuring, soft jazz weaving through the air. Natalie stood just outside the entrance with Keanu, both dressed modestly. not to draw attention, but there was a quiet electricity between them. They weren't here to dine. They were here to end a lie. Keanu gave her a small nod. Natalie stepped forward first, her eyes scanning the room. She could see Carla near the bar, laughing with a couple of executives. Ryder was at the service terminal, typing something rapidly into the POS system. He didn't notice them until it was too late. Natalie moved past the tables confidently. She wore no manager's badge, no title, just purpose and something deeper truth. "Ryder," she called, firm and loud enough to draw attention. His head snapped up. He froze. Before he could speak, Keanu stepped beside her, calm, still, watching. Carla turned, saw them, and narrowed her eyes. "Well, well, look who crawled back." Natalie ignored the venom. "We need to speak. Now, both of you." "We're working," Carla snapped. "If you want to make a reservation, go through proper." Natalie didn't flinch. She pulled out a slim folder and set it on the bar with a soft thud. Inside were printed reports, surveillance screenshots, inventory logs, and time-stamped overrides from the POS system. Double entries, voided tips, unapproved discounts, vendor invoices for items never delivered, payroll allocations that don't match clock-in records. Carla laughed bitterly. "You think this little folder makes you Sherlock Holmes?" "No," Natalie replied, "but it makes you caught." Ryder was pale now, hands trembling slightly on the edge of the counter. Carla, in contrast, puffed herself up, her voice rising. "You're nothing but a waitress with luck. You got lucky. Brent liked your face, and now what you think you're some kind of hero?" Keanu's voice sliced through the noise, like a slow blade. "And you're a manager with secrets." Silence fell like a curtain. Several guests turned their heads. Staff peeked out from the kitchen. Someone dropped a spoon. Carla's expression flickered. Fear slipped behind her lips before she recovered. "This is defamation. You'll regret this." Keanu didn't blink. "You already do." From the side, the quietly stationed security officer, one of Keanu's, stepped forward. He wasn't dressed in uniform, just khakis and a button-down, but his presence was solid. Official. He gently motioned to Carla. "I'd like you to come with me, ma'am." "You have no right," she hissed. "You're not the law." "True," he said. "But the law is waiting downstairs." Carla turned to Ryder, eyes wild. "Say something. Don't just stand there." But Ryder was trembling now. His shoulders slumped. I didn't know it was part of something bigger," he mumbled. "She told me it was just temporary, that everyone did it to make up for bad shifts. I didn't think it would go this far." Keanu glanced at Natalie, then back at Ryder. "You knew enough to override receipts, to enter manual tips. That's not confusion, that's theft." Ryder looked down. "Please, don't fire me. I'll fix it. I'll pay it back. I swear." Natalie didn't speak right away. She studied him. The fear, the shame, the absence of arrogance, now replaced by desperation. This wasn't a man defending greed. It was a boy who had drowned in someone else's tide. Natalie let the silence linger, letting Ryder feel the weight of what he'd done. She glanced at Keanu again. He didn't speak. He wanted this decision to be hers. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think the people who took shortcuts were just lazy. But now I know some of them are just scared. Scared they'll never be seen, that their best isn't enough, that the system is rigged." Ryder didn't look up. He nodded faintly. "You had a choice, Ryder. Maybe Carla made it sound harmless. Maybe you didn't plan to go this far, but you still crossed the line. You cheated this place. You cheated the team. You even cheated yourself." His shoulders shook. "I don't want to be like her," he whispered. "I really don't." Natalie's eyes didn't soften, but her voice did. "Then prove it." He looked up. "What do you mean?" "I'm not going to fire you. Not yet. But from this moment on, everything changes. You'll be on probation. You'll report directly to me. Every shift, every transaction. And you'll do something Carla never did. You'll learn what it means to lead with integrity." His eyes widened. "You're giving me another chance?" "One," she said firmly. "Only one." Keanu nodded in approval. Natalie believes in building something stronger than just profit. She believes in people. Ryder wiped his face quickly. Thank you. I won't mess this up. As the staff quietly resumed their tasks and Carla was led out of the building, the energy in the restaurant began to shift. Word spread quickly, as it always did. But this time, it wasn't fear or gossip that hung in the air. It was change. Keanu walked beside Natalie toward the back office. That was brave, he said softly. No, Natalie replied. It was necessary. He opened the office door and let her step in first. What made you give him a second chance? She hesitated, then answered. Because once, someone did the same for me. Keanu smiled gently. That someone must have been very wise. Maybe a little stubborn too, she added. They shared a quiet laugh, the tension of the confrontation slowly fading behind them. But Natalie knew this wasn't the end of the journey. The ring Brent belonged to still operated in the shadows, and now she was part of the mission to expose them. As she sat at the desk, gathering the reports, she caught sight of her old name tag tucked in a drawer. Natalie, server. She held it for a second, then placed it beside her new one. Natalie, general manager. Side by side, they looked like two lives. But they were really just one journey, one that was far from over. The first thing Natalie changed wasn't the furniture or the uniforms or the menu. It was the tone. She called a staff meeting the following Monday. Every team member, servers, hosts, kitchen crew, even janitors, stood in a loose circle in the dining area before the lunch rush. Some crossed their arms. A few avoided eye contact. A couple looked hopeful, but cautious. The air still carried traces of tension, like everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Natalie stepped into the center and didn't raise her voice. She didn't bring out a stack of policies or corporate jargon. She simply began. I know it's been a hard couple of weeks. For all of us. Silence. Heads slightly nodded. We've lost trust in some leaders, and we've lost some trust in each other. That's not going to be fixed overnight. But I'm here to rebuild, and I can't do it alone. She held up a small binder. This is our new training and accountability program. But it's not just about rules. It's about fairness, respect, and creating a place we're proud to work in. Someone in the back whispered, We've heard that before. Natalie caught it, but didn't flinch. I don't blame you for being skeptical, but this is different. Because this time, every one of you will help shape it. She walked to the front table and revealed 3 new additions. A locked anonymous feedback box, a wall-mounted shift scoreboard, and a rotating leadership board that included temporary team captains from the floor staff. No more whispers in the break room, she said. If you see something wrong, report it. You don't need to go through a manager first. Your voice matters. And every week, we'll read anonymous feedback aloud at the meeting. No names, no blame. Just truth. Someone actually raised an eyebrow. A few others leaned in. And payroll? She continued. Every paycheck now comes with a clear hours report. Everyone sees their logged time. No more forgotten shifts. No more unexplained deductions. Now a few heads turned toward one another. This was real. And starting next month, Natalie said with a soft smile, we'll be hosting community nights. Every 4th Thursday, we close the dining room early and serve a free meal to underprivileged families from the neighborhood. No uniforms, no tips. Just us, giving back. Together. A quiet ripple moved through the team. It wasn't applause, not yet. But it was no longer resistance either. Miguel stepped forward first. So, no more senior staff privileges? Natalie nodded. We're one team. Titles don't give anyone a pass anymore. But good leadership will be recognized. He crossed his arms. And if we still have questions, ask me. Ask publicly. Challenge the system if something doesn't feel right. The room didn't explode with cheers, but something cracked open. Not in Natalie. In them, it was the beginning of something new. The first week was rocky. The feedback box filled up with everything from genuine concerns to sarcastic jokes. Someone wrote, "Give us raises or give us naps." Another scribbled, "Can we have karaoke night?" But beneath the humor, Natalie found threads of truth comments about inconsistent scheduling, favoritism, and burnout. She read them aloud at the next team meeting. Every single one. No censorship, she said. Even the ones that sting. And they did sting. A few staff members laughed uncomfortably, but others looked surprised, maybe even impressed, that she'd read the ones that criticized her directly. One card had said, "Natalie talks like a manager now, not one of us." She paused after reading that. Fair point, she admitted. Maybe I've gotten caught up in leading from above instead of beside you. I'll work on that. That moment shifted everything. Little by little, the culture started to change. Servers began swapping shifts more respectfully. Kitchen staff cleaned up more thoroughly without being asked. Natalie walked the floor more frequently, not to police, but to check in. She asked how people were doing, not just if the tables were full, but how they were holding up. Miguel, who had once kept his distance, started showing up early and staying late. One night, after closing, he stayed behind to help a newer server balance her receipts. "You used to keep to yourself," Natalie said, as they both watched him from the back. "I was waiting to see if this was real," one of the hosts replied. "I think he sees it now." By the end of the second week, Natalie pulled Miguel aside. "I'm creating a new floor manager rotation. We need someone who understands the day-to-day and leads without ego. I'd like you to be the first." He blinked. "Me? You're already doing the job." "I'm just making it official." Miguel agreed, but only on one condition. "I want others trained too. No more single-point failures. If I go down, someone else steps up." Natalie smiled. "Deal." As for Ryder, the days after the confrontation had been tense. He returned to work quiet, avoiding eye contact with most of the team. Natalie kept him on back-of-house tasks for the first few days, letting the dust settle, but she didn't isolate him. One afternoon, she found him sweeping the back hallway long after his shift. "You don't have to stay late," she said gently. "I know," he said. "I'm not trying to prove anything." "Then what are you doing?" He leaned on the broom, trying to start over. That was enough for Natalie. She assigned him a role helping with the new hire orientation group, starting small. Ryder handled it with care, even offering personal tips to new servers. When one trainee dropped her tray during her first shift, he was the first to kneel down and help her clean it up. "You've got it rough your first week," he said with a small smile. "But it gets better." By the fourth week, reviews started to trickle in, this time in a different tone. "Staff seems genuinely happy," one Yelp review said. "Atmosphere feels lighter. Best service we've had in months. You can tell something's changed." Natalie read them aloud at the end of week team huddle. She didn't cry, but her voice caught. It was working, and not because she'd laid down the law, but because she'd listened, adjusted, and trusted the right people to step up when given a chance. The buzz inside the restaurant grew. The late afternoon sun spilled through the restaurant windows, casting warm golden streaks across the polished floors. The dinner rush hadn't started yet. Servers were folding napkins at the host stand. Miguel was restocking menus. Natalie was reviewing tomorrow's schedule when the door opened and the temperature in the room dropped like a stone. Brent walked in. He didn't just enter, he owned the moment, or so he thought. He wore the same smug expression he'd always carried when he was in charge. Chin tilted, sunglasses still on indoors. His presence was jarring. Several employees froze. A busboy dropped a glass in the back. Even Miguel stiffened near the register. Natalie didn't move. Brent walked straight toward her, uninvited and undeterred. "Well, well," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look who thinks she runs the place now." Natalie didn't flinch. "You're not supposed to be here. I go where I want," he said smoothly. "Still have friends in the company. Maybe you forgot who built this place." "I didn't forget," Natalie said evenly. "I remember exactly what you built. That's why we're tearing it down." Brent chuckled. "You? Tear me down? Come on, Natalie. You're a waitress with a badge. This whole act you're putting on, it's cute. But this game was never for people like you." Natalie stood straighter. Her voice was calm, but firm. "You're right. I was just a waitress, and I worked every table, cleaned every spill, got burned and bruised just trying to get by. But people like me, we remember." We don't fake smiles for power. We don't lie to make a buck. We build trust, one plate, one shift, one moment at a time. That's something you'll never understand. Brent smirked. Big speech. You practicing for Employee of the Month? Behind him, the front doors opened again. Footsteps. 3 of them. Keanu Reeves entered quietly, dressed in a dark jacket, no need to say a word. Behind him walked 2 sharply dressed corporate attorneys. One male, one female, both carrying leather folders and briefcases. Brent's grin faltered. Keanu stepped beside Natalie, nodding at her like this was all according to plan. His presence was calm, but commanding, and the room turned entirely toward him. You came all this way just to see me? Brent scoffed, trying to regain control. That's flattering. No, Keanu said calmly. I came to end this. The female attorney opened her briefcase and removed a thick folder. Brent laughed. You think I'm scared of paperwork? We're not just firing you, the male attorney said. We're pressing charges. Wire fraud, wage theft, document tampering. Brent blinked. Keanu continued. You didn't just cook books. You manipulated hiring processes, exploited undocumented workers, stole tips, and then tried to vanish, like none of it mattered. You don't have proof, Brent snapped. Natalie stepped forward. She pulled out the final piece writer's signed statement, Miguel's logbooks, Carla's confession, and the archived security logs from 3 locations, all laid out on the table between them. Brent looked down. His smirk was gone. The silence that followed was suffocating. Brent's eyes darted across the table at the pile of documents, his bravado cracking. He reached for the papers like he could somehow erase them if he touched them fast enough. Keanu stopped him with a single quiet sentence. You've already signed everything you need to sign. You just didn't know it yet. The male attorney added, your digital footprint is all over this. You used your own login for every manipulation. You left a trail in the accounting software and in emails to your co-conspirators. And we have the subpoenas ready to go. All it took was someone brave enough to start pulling the thread. Brent turned toward Natalie, his expression darkening. You think you're safe? This won't stick. Natalie didn't blink. It's already stuck. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing. You betrayed the system that gave you a job. No, she said. I saved the people it was built to abuse. Brent let out a bitter laugh, but there was no venom left in it. Just noise. Just the echo of someone who used to have power and no longer did. You know what happens to whistleblowers, right? He sneered. They burn out. They lose everything. Keanu spoke again, calm and direct. She's not alone. She has us. And you have the Department of Labor waiting outside. As if on cue, the restaurant's front doors opened once more. This time, 2 men in plain clothes walked in, with federal badges tucked at their hips. They didn't need an announcement. Brent saw them and froze. Natalie folded her arms, unshaken. Your time is up. The younger of the agents walked toward Brent, removing a pair of handcuffs from his belt with slow precision. Brent backed up. You've got nothing. We've got enough to start, the agent said. You'll get your chance to talk, in a courtroom. Brent looked at Keanu one last time, perhaps expecting a flicker of sympathy. He found none, just a quiet steadiness that offered no room for debate. The cuffs clicked around his wrists. As they led him toward the door, he tried one last performance for the crowd. You'll all regret this. The next guy won't be nicer. I built this place. No one answered. Not Miguel, not Ryder, not the kitchen staff who had quietly gathered near the pass window. Even the hostess, who used to fear Brent's temper, simply turned away. Outside, the door shut behind them. And just like that, Brent became what he feared most, irrelevant. Natalie stood still, her body finally relaxing as the air in the restaurant returned to normal. Keanu turned to her. You okay? She nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I finally am. He gave a small, almost proud smile. You did something most people never do. You stood up to a machine and rewired it. Natalie looked out across the restaurant, at the team watching her not with pity or hesitation, but with quiet admiration. For the first time, she didn't feel like a survivor. She felt like a leader. 2 months had passed since Brent was escorted out in handcuffs, and the energy in the restaurant had transformed. But Natalie's story didn't end there. In fact, it had only just begun. Natalie now stood in the middle of a different restaurant, one of 2 new locations she was now responsible for overseeing. The sun poured through the windows, bathing the clean hardwood floors in warm light. Staff members moved with purpose and coordination, a rhythm built on mutual respect. She had spent the morning leading a training session with a dozen new hires. They weren't just learning the menu, they were learning how to spot signs of burnout, how to speak up without fear, and how to support each other under pressure. She watched as one of the younger servers helped another memorize the wine list, not because they had to, but because they wanted each other to succeed. Natalie had changed the culture, and it was spreading. The training system she developed was now a standard pilot program across the company, monthly feedback circles, an open-door policy for management, and anonymous suggestion boxes placed in staff areas. But it wasn't about policies. It was about presence. Natalie made herself visible, not as a supervisor looming in the shadows, but as a partner who rolled up her sleeves when the kitchen got slammed. She greeted everyone by name. She remembered birthdays. She celebrated small wins like they were Michelin stars. In her eyes, service was sacred. Hospitality wasn't just about the guests, it was about how the team treated one another, and that belief was catching fire. At the second location across town, Miguel had been promoted to lead trainer and was now mentoring Ryder, who had slowly earned the crew's trust again by showing up early, volunteering for the late shifts, and apologizing without excuses. The guy who once joked about skipping payroll logs now ran the cleanest books in the entire district. Natalie didn't forget the pain it took to reach this moment, but she also didn't let that pain define her. Instead, she poured it into building something stronger, and on one unannounced afternoon, as the dinner rush began, Natalie sensed she was being watched. She turned toward the back wall where the oversized mirror near the bar gave her a reflection of the entrance. There he was, Keanu. Wearing a black baseball cap pulled low and a gray hoodie, he stood quietly near the edge of the dining room. He wasn't here to make a scene. He rarely was. But even from across the room, his presence carried a kind of silent weight. Natalie grinned, hiding the surprise behind a calm nod. She finished giving a prep reminder to the hostess, then walked slowly over. "Are you here as a customer?" she asked playfully. "Or as a secret inspector?" Keanu smirked. "Just a fan." She crossed her arms, glancing around the bustling room. "So, did I pass the test?" He looked around, his eyes lingering on the laughter between the bartenders, the clean corners of the prep station, the visible smiles instead of faked ones. Then he turned to her and said quietly, "You rewrote the test." Natalie let out a small laugh at his words, but there was warmth behind her smile. Keanu's compliment wasn't flattery. It was recognition from someone who understood what it meant to rise after being broken. They sat down at a corner booth for a few minutes, watching the restaurant pulse with life. Natalie offered him a coffee, but he shook his head politely. He wasn't there for food or drink. He was there to observe something he had quietly nurtured from a distance finally take full shape. "Do you ever miss the chaos?" she asked. Keanu looked at her curiously. The nights where nothing worked, when the system was broken and you had to fix it with duct tape and prayer? He chuckled. "I miss the people, but not the lies." Natalie nodded slowly. She understood. Her own scars from that season were still tender. There were nights she still woke up remembering Carla's venom, or Brent's smug face, or the fear that maybe, just maybe, they'd win. But they didn't. And now, she was steering a different ship. That same evening, Miguel called her from the second location. "The new server you referred, Lena?" She stayed late to help clean the walk-in. Said she learned from watching you. Natalie smiled and gave a quiet, "Good," then ended the call. Every win now felt personal, not because of pride, but because she saw herself in these people. She saw the young woman she used to be, the one who kept her head down, afraid of being too visible, too vocal, too much. Not anymore. Now, she made sure no one on her team ever felt invisible. Ryder was proof that even the most broken could rebuild. His past mistakes didn't disappear, but he faced them daily by working with humility. Natalie had paired him with one of the newer kitchen assistants who struggled with anxiety, and somehow, Ryder had become her fiercest advocate. Keanu looked around and said, "I've been to five-star places that didn't feel this alive." Natalie tilted her head, letting the words sink in. It wasn't about fancy plating or perfect service anymore. It was about dignity, about care, about how people felt when they walked in, and even more so, how they felt when they walked out. She glanced toward the entrance, where a guest in a wheelchair was being helped by two servers who offered not just assistance but genuine kindness. "I think we're building something that lasts," Natalie said. Keanu looked at her and simply replied, "You are." The moment held, quiet and full, and then Natalie stood, duty calling again. A guest needed help with a reservation issue, and the kitchen was behind on one of the orders. But before she turned away, she looked back at Keanu and added softly, "Thank you for seeing me, even when I didn't see myself." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His presence was the answer. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon when Natalie finally reached into her purse looking for an old receipt. The restaurant had already gone through its lunch rush. The new assistant manager was holding down the floor, so Natalie had taken a rare moment of peace in the office. As her fingers searched beneath pens, keys, and folded papers, they brushed against something that didn't belong, smooth, creased, and warm with familiarity. She pulled it out slowly. A folded piece of notebook paper. Her heart skipped. She knew that handwriting. It was crooked, bold, with letters spaced unevenly, like they were stretching to stay upright. Luca. She unfolded it, and her breath caught before she even finished reading. "You're my hero," the note began. Her hands trembled slightly as her eyes moved down the page. "I tell people my sister works with Keanu Reeves, but that's not what makes you cool. What makes you cool is that you never gave up. Not on us, not on yourself. Not even when I was a brat who didn't understand what you were going through. I'm learning, Nat, because of you." There was a tiny doodle at the bottom corner. It was a stick figure with wild hair holding a sword. "Luca's hero," it read. Natalie didn't cry immediately. She stared at the note for a long time, letting the words soak in like sunlight after a long winter. Then, like a quiet tide, the tears came not from sadness or exhaustion, but from a release she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She held the note to her chest. Luca had been just a boy when everything fell apart, when their father left, when their mother got sick, when Natalie had to drop out of community college and start waitressing just to keep food on the table. Luca had resented her for it, not because he hated her, but because he didn't understand the weight she carried. She had always feared he never would. But now, in 10 imperfect lines of ink, he had made her feel seen in a way no corporate award or public review ever could. A soft knock tapped on the office door. Miguel peeked in. "Everything okay?" Natalie wiped her face gently with the back of her hand and nodded. "Yeah, everything's more than okay." He gave a small smile and didn't ask more. That was the thing about people who had gone through fire. They learned to recognize the weight of a good moment without asking for the details. Later that night, Natalie did something she hadn't done in years. She reserved a table, not for a meeting, not for a customer complaint, for herself. She ordered her favorite meal, grilled salmon with citrus glaze, a side of buttery mashed potatoes, and a slice of key lime pie. She sat near the window, where the city lights blinked gently through the glass, and for once, she didn't worry about the floor plan, the tips, the inventory count, or tomorrow. She just let herself exist. The key lime pie came with an extra swirl of whipped cream, and Natalie couldn't help but laugh softly when she saw it. One of the newer servers, a shy kid named Anna, had taken it upon herself to add the flourish. "I thought you deserved something sweet," she said with a grin, when she brought the plate over. Natalie smiled back. "You have no idea how much that means to me." She took a slow bite, savoring the tangy flavor, the creaminess, the way the crust flaked just right. It was more than dessert. It was a quiet reward for every night she had skipped dinner, every shift she had worked through sickness, every insult she had taken and tucked away just to make it through the day. The note from Luca stayed folded in her pocket. She had read it 5 times already, and she knew she'd read it 5 more before the night was over. In the corner of the restaurant, a small birthday party was gathering. Balloons floated gently over the table. A grandfather laughed with his grandkids. The servers were moving with ease. No shouting, no confusion. Just warmth. Natalie watched it all unfold and felt something click inside her. Peace, not the kind you fake with a forced smile, but the kind that settles in your bones when you realize you've done something good, something lasting. She remembered the early days when she wasn't sure if she'd survive one more shift, let alone manage an entire location. Back then, she had told herself that stability would be enough. Just a steady paycheck, maybe a day off once in a while. But that wasn't what had happened. She had built more than survival. She had built trust, respect, a culture where people had each other's backs. And in that space, she had finally found herself again, not the girl who had to fight to be heard, but the woman who others now listened to. She glanced at her phone. A new message from Ryder had come in. "Got my GED results. I passed. Couldn't have done it without you." Natalie let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. Ryder, the same young man who had once almost ruined the business with his poor judgment, had turned a corner. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying. And trying counted. It always had. She texted back, "Proud of you. Let's talk about your next goal soon." That had become her rhythm, lifting others as she climbed. Not because she had to, but because she could. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a picture. Luca, holding up a drawing. Another stick figure with a sword. But this time, the figure stood on a small hill, surrounded by smiling faces. "This is you at work," his message read. "Even if they don't know it yet." Natalie stared at the screen, then looked around the restaurant again. Maybe they didn't know every part of her story, but they felt the results of it. In every laugh, every safe conversation, every plate that came out warm and perfect. And for once, that was enough. The early evening sunlight poured golden over the brick exterior of the newest Grill Haven location, casting soft shadows across the fresh banner that fluttered just above the doors. It read in bold letters, "Now hiring, fair pay, real growth." Below it stood Natalie, clipboard in one hand, the other resting casually in her pocket. She wasn't wearing a uniform anymore. Instead, a tailored blouse and slacks gave her the air of someone who didn't just work here, but someone who shaped what this place had become. Behind her, the laughter of new employees filled the air, blending with the sizzle of grills and the low hum of upbeat music. Customers smiled, staff moved with energy, and no one seemed afraid of being overheard or overlooked. The atmosphere had transformed completely. Natalie turned to look at the storefront, her gaze lingering on the windows where smiling employee photos had been hung beside the menu. Miguel's face was there now, a Shift Leader of the Month badge, digitally printed beneath his name. Next to him was Ryder. He'd earned it back. His journey hadn't been perfect, but he had owned every mistake and earned every inch of trust in return. Natalie smiled, but it wasn't the wide, celebratory kind. It was smaller, quieter, the kind of smile that knew how much it cost to build something this real. Her thoughts drifted, not just to the battle she had fought, but to the people who fought beside her. To Keanu, whose calm strength had been like a lighthouse in a violent storm. To Luca, whose small note still lived inside her purse like a soft whisper from home. And to every waitress, dishwasher, and busboy who had once been too afraid to speak but now laughed freely on their breaks. Change hadn't come overnight. It never does, but it had come, slowly, deeply, and it had stayed. She exhaled and stepped forward, adjusting the hiring banner slightly as it flapped in the breeze. It wasn't just about filling roles. It was about inviting people into a culture that protected them, lifted them, gave them room to grow without fear. Her mind replayed Keanu's words that day in the break room, words she hadn't fully understood until now. She didn't serve a customer, he had said, looking directly at the board of directors after the confrontation. She served humanity. At the time, it had felt too big for her, too generous. But now she understood. When you help someone who doesn't have a voice, when you step between someone and injustice, when you risk your own comfort so others can breathe easier, you're not just doing a job, you're restoring dignity. That realization rooted in her chest like a tree she didn't know she'd planted. She brushed a hand along the smooth frame of the door, then looked up again at the banner. The world was full of broken systems. But here, in this corner of it, justice had taken root. She straightened her shoulders, walked inside, and got back to work. Later that night, the restaurant had quieted. The last table was cleared, the floors freshly mopped, and the scent of lemon cleaner mingled with the lingering warmth of grilled rosemary chicken. Natalie stood alone in the manager's office, the door ajar behind her. She stared at the small corkboard where a single photograph was pinned, the original staff photo from the day she first started. Her hair had been tied back then, her eyes wary. Ryder stood stiffly off to the side. Miguel wasn't even in the frame yet. So much had changed. She closed the office door, not to shut the world out, but to seal the memory in. One last look at where it began, before stepping into what came next. She walked out the front entrance, locked it carefully, and turned to see a familiar figure sitting on the bench across the parking lot. Keanu. He looked like any other man resting after a long day, worn boots, sleeves rolled up, water bottle in hand. But the glint in his eye carried something deeper, understanding. She walked over. "You've been sitting here a while," she said, gently teasing. "I like the view," he replied. "You can see more than bricks and banners from here." She sat beside him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Just the sound of distant traffic, the hum of street lamps flickering on, and the quiet rustle of evening wind. "You once asked me if you passed the test," Keanu finally said. She laughed softly. "I did. I remember." He turned to face her, sincerity etched into the lines around his eyes. "You didn't pass the test, Natalie. You rewrote it." Her smile trembled, caught between pride and emotion. "You took everything broken in that place and turned it into something living, something that breathes respect. That's not just leadership, that's legacy." She blinked back the sting of tears, not because she felt overwhelmed, but because she finally allowed herself to feel proud. "I used to think survival was enough," she said. "Keep your head down, get through the day, and maybe, something will get better." He nodded. "But then you walked in. And suddenly I realized surviving wasn't the goal. It was the obstacle." Keanu smiled, a quiet expression that carried the weight of shared understanding. "You helped me see that thriving wasn't selfish," she added. "It was the start of helping others rise too." The two sat in silence again. This time, it was full, complete. Behind them, the banner waved in the wind. Now hiring, fair pay, real growth. It wasn't just a slogan, it was a promise. A promise that started with one waitress, one fight, one moment of courage. And now, it reached into the lives of dozens, maybe hundreds, maybe more. Keanu stood, nodding toward the night sky. Sometimes all it takes is helping one person, even when no one's watching. Natalie rose beside him, the words rooting in her heart. This was only the beginning. Natalie stood beneath the banner, the wind tugging gently at its corners. Now hiring, fair pay, real growth. The words were no longer just painted promises. They were lived truths. Behind her, the kitchen staff laughed as they cleaned. The new recruits she trained walked with purpose. This wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a second chance, wrapped in aprons and lined with dignity. She thought of Luca's note tucked safely in her wallet. She thought of the night she almost quit. And then she thought of Keanu's voice, quiet and certain. She didn't serve a customer. She served humanity. That line had spread, first to a staff newsletter, then to a national article. Now it was engraved on a small plaque hanging by the front door. Customers paused to read it. Some took photos, others simply smiled. Because something extraordinary had happened here. Not because someone became famous, but because someone became seen. And maybe that's where change really begins, with a moment of seeing, of helping, even when no one's watching. Have you ever helped someone without expecting anything back? Tell us your incredible story in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story of second chances.